Good evening, I'm Steve Kornacki in New York, in for Chris Matthews. We begin tonight with the most dangerous game in politics today, taking on Donald Trump. Last night, Trump gloated about the state of Rick Perry's campaign, which ran out of money despite a media blitz attacking Trump. He also reveled in Lindsey Graham's struggles, which come despite a flood of media interviews where Graham bashed Trump as a, quote, jackass. In an interview with Fox's Sean Hannity and an appearance in Michigan yesterday, Trump was out to make an example of those two, that if you end up on Trump's hit list, this is what might happen to you.
Lindsey Graham hit me harder than anybody. He's got 0.
Lindsey Graham is at 0. Legitimately, I saw it on television. 0. 0.
Perry hit me harder than anybody. Those were the two. And Perry was at 4 or 5, and he went down to 2 and went down to nothing, and now I guess he's out of the campaign.
You know what's a great honor? They hit me really hard, right? And they went down.
I mean, Perry went to Washington to make a speech about me. It wasn't nice. He went from 4 or 5 down to 2. And didn't even make the debate stage. Lindsey Graham was at 2, and he went to nothing. So I'm really very honored by that.
Perry Bacon is senior political reporter with NBC News. Susan Page is Washington bureau chief with USA Today. And Kwame Jackson was a finalist on Trump's The Apprentice reality TV show on NBC. He's now an entrepreneur and consultant. Well, Susan, let me start with you. Look, we can debate whether attacking Trump actually brought down the poll numbers of Perry and Lindsey Graham. They weren't too high to start with, so who really knows? But it's clear what they were trying to do here was what I'd call the adult in the room strategy. They wanted to be the voice of reason that attacks Donald Trump for being intemperate to get credit for that. George Pataki tried this too. This was their attempt to latch on to the Trump media coverage and make a name for themselves. And Trump has a point, right? It failed.
Well, and it's obviously risky because Trump is on a roll, and we don't see the candidates that are doing a little better, like Rubio or Kasich is kind of on the rise doing this. These are candidates that already have a big problem. They're not doing well in the polls. They are trying to get into the story, so they take this strategy of attacking Trump. Now, most frontrunners in Trump's situation would ignore them, would just pretend they weren't there, because why give publicity to somebody who's not doing well? But Trump only seems to have one gear, and that is, if you attack me, I'm going to attack you back. And this may be some kind of preemptive as other candidates think about whether to take him on.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. The conventional wisdom in politics has always been if you're the front runner and the guy way in the back of the pack is attacking you, you ignore him. You know, you don't want to give him the attention that he's looking for. Trump, of course, breaks all the rules. And Trump also pulling away in Iowa right now, a state known for high evangelical turnout in its caucuses. According to a new CNN ORC poll out just today, Trump now leads with 22%. That's 8 points clear of Ben Carson back in second place. He also blows away Christian conservatives like Ted Cruz, Mike Huckabee, and others. And on that note, Trump took a detour in last night's campaign event after he spotted a member of the audience holding a copy of his book, The Art of the Deal, which Trump noted is actually his second favorite book. Let's watch.
Oh, he's got the order. Hold that book up, please. Okay. One of the great books. That's my second favorite book of all time. Do you know what my first is? The Bible. Nothing beats the Bible. Nothing beats the Bible. Not even The Art of the Deal. Not even close, okay?
Perry, another piece of conventional wisdom that may be being blown up in front of our eyes. You know, Trump was out there in Iowa a couple weeks ago at an evangelical event. He used some foul language. People said, well, you can't do that in front of a Christian audience and get their support. There's Donald Trump making jokes about the Bible and leading in Iowa. 60% of the caucus goers out there are evangelicals.
Exactly. The polls showed he had pretty broad support among moderate Republicans and also among Tea Party folks and also among some evangelicals. So he's doing really well in Iowa. The thing that's been so striking is that you've had all these people in the Republican Party attack him, from Rand Paul to Perry, but also Red State. Also, Megyn Kelly was critical of him. And his poll numbers have not just not went down, they've actually went up in some ways, which tells you at this point he does have some kind of stable part of the Republican Party. From 10 to 15 to 20% right now are with him, and those people are not going away, even as lots of people in the Republican Party attack Trump very harshly.
Well, Kwame, you know him in an up-close and personal way that nobody else here does, that nobody really covering politics does. So I got to ask you this, the psychology of Donald Trump in this moment. We're talking about all these examples over the last few months where everybody in the political media has said, it's suicidal what you're doing politically. You're going to do that, you're going to be out of the race in no time. And every time he's done that, his numbers have only gone up. I got to imagine a guy with an incredible ego like that to begin with. What is he feeling about himself right now?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I think that, you know, my relationship there and the fact that I do know him well is to quote Jay-Z, maybe the gift and the curse, like his album. I'm not exactly sure how that plays out because I think that Trump, at first and foremost, is an entertainer. I think that people give him credit on the political front, but I think he's tapped into the American zeitgeist of anger. I think he's tapped into, if you dissect the polls in Iowa, it talks about how people below $50,000 earning a year are supporting him. People without college education are supporting him. That's a real bastion of support for him. And so it's a different type of voter that maybe necessarily doesn't resonate with his actual political dimension. So Trump is an interesting character. I think he's an entertainer first, and I think we have to let that part play out in much more of a Kardashian-like fashion.
Well, last night, Trump also fired a shot across the bow of the Rand Paul campaign after Paul launched a media blitz attacking Trump.
Two guys that hit me the hardest were Perry, right? Perry and Graham. They hit me harder than anybody else. Now it's Rand Paul. Can you believe it? He's the new one. I said, Rand, I've had you up to here. I've had you. I've had you up to here.
Well, today, Rand Paul's campaign released a video online attacking Trump's conservative record. Let's watch some of that video.
In many cases, I probably identify more as a Democrat. I've been around for a long time, and it just seems that the economy does better under the Democrats than the Republicans.
Healthcare.
Liberal in healthcare. We have to take care of people that are sick.
Universal health coverage.
I
for the
love
nation.
universal. Hillary Clinton, I think, is a terrific woman. I mean, I'm a little biased because I've known her for years. I live in New York. She lives in New York, and I've known her and her husband for years, and I really like them both a lot.
Susan, nothing exactly new here. This stuff's been out for a while. Some of these clips 10, 15 years old. Trump's been confronted with this stuff before, even in the debate last week. We're not seeing that to that base that's supporting him, this seems to matter too much. Does raise the question to me, does Rand Paul understand the base of his own party?
Well, you know, under conventional rules, a candidate that's really inconsistent with positions he's taken in the past, that would be a problem. We've got to remember, Donald Trump is not a conventional politician. All the rules that seem to apply to other candidates do not apply to him. And look at that. Look back at that CNN poll in Iowa that is just out. The two leaders are Donald Trump and Ben Carson, two candidates who neither of whom have ever run for office before, neither have any record of public service, and yet these are the candidates that voters in Iowa are lining up behind. That tells you that some of the politics as usual stuff, people are really sick of it, and some of the standards that they have traditionally applied to political candidates may no longer be quite so important, at least at this point in the contest.
Yeah, the Ben Carson thing, I got to say, that also surprises me a little bit because you think back to the debate, you think of the last few weeks, and the Trump thing's kind of obvious. He's making a lot of noise. Okay, I guess that's connected to a polling surge. Ben Carson, I think, basically said nothing in that debate. His most memorable line was, I thought you forgot I was here. He seems to have surged in the polls after that. I can't figure that out. But also, Trump has had his sights on Jeb Bush since he launched his campaign. Last night, he delivered two major attacks on Bush. The first came during a press conference in Michigan, where he reminded reporters that Trump was the center of the Republican universe, not Jeb. Here's Trump talking about the massive audience for last week's debate.
There should have been 2 million people watching. You agree? About 2 million. That's been sort of standard, 2 million people. They had 24 million people. Who do you think they're watching? Jeb Bush? Huh? I don't think so.
In talking with Sean Hannity last night, Trump went after Bush as a mouthpiece for wealthy donors.
When Jeb Bush raises $114 million, which he has, when Hillary raises $60 million, which he has, I know the people that gave him the money. These are not the nicest people in the world.
This system is, at its root, corrupt.
Well, Jeb Bush is totally controlled by the people that gave him that money. And the nice part about me, I don't want anybody's money.
This is fascinating to me, Perry, because Donald Trump is, he's a rich guy. He's a billionaire. Jeb Bush is the son of political privilege. I mean, these two guys just sort of reek of the establishment. And yet Donald Trump is drawing this distinction here, basically saying, hey, my wealth frees me from the political establishment. It allows me to say, I don't need your money. It allows me to throw it right back in their face. I know wealthy candidates make this argument a lot. I think it has some resonance.
The one thing Trump is bringing to this race more than anything else is he's saying things that people don't say. He's very honest and at times very not politically correct. But in this case, the chief critiques of Bush are Bush is kind of dull, people think, and he's the candidate of the wealthy Republican class, which is exactly what Donald Trump said. The danger with Donald Trump is if you attack him, he won't just attack your views, he'll attack who you are in a way that's pretty resonant. Like a lot of Democrat Republicans I've talked to the last couple weeks have said, Jeb is okay, he's just too dull and too charismatic. Donald Trump is saying that over and over and over again, and that's a problem for Jeb Bush, even if Trump is not going to win the primary.
Well, Trump also went outside of his own party last night. He took a shot at Bernie Sanders, who's caught fire in a new poll out of New Hampshire. Trump went after Sanders for an incident over the weekend where protesters took the microphone at a Sanders campaign event up in Seattle, rendering him speechless. Here's what Trump had to say about that.
I would never give up my microphone. I thought that was disgusting. That showed such weakness. That will never happen with me. I don't know if I'll do the fighting myself or if other people will. But that was a disgrace. The way I felt badly for him. But it showed that he's weak. You know what? He's getting the biggest crowds, and I'm getting the biggest crowds. We're the two getting the crowds. But believe me, that's not going to happen to Trump.
Not going to happen to Trump. Well, Susan Page, first of all, it makes me think, are protesters now going to take that as an invitation to test Trump and see how he handles himself in a situation like that? But it also is listening to him right there, the way he's talking, you know, Bernie's weak, I'm tough, won't happen with me. It kind of gets to the heart of the message that he's been saying. It's not a policy message. It's not an ideological message. It's, hey, China, Mexico, I'm the tough guy who's going to stand up for you.
Exactly.
And you know, it's so unusual for the candidate leading one party's poll to attack somebody who we don't think will probably get the nomination in the other party. And again, if it's not as though Trump is making elaborate strategies here when he talks. I think he just says whatever comes out of his mouth, and that includes these references to Sanders. One thing, I don't believe that was a Sanders campaign event. I think it was another event that Sanders was supposed to speak at, although it is true that he was unable to speak because of those protesters.
All right. Perry Bacon, Susan Page, Kwame Jackson, thank you all for being here.